Chapter 711. The Night Marshal. Chapter 711. The Night Marshal on his way to Winterhold. John used his magical steed, Sleipnir of Greed, to ride from Eastmarch's frigid shores to the lone island where the old scholar, Septimus Cygnus, used to set up camp around a sunken ancient Dwemer lockbox. It was not too long ago when John discovered the relationship between Septimus and Nurina as divorcees. While it was shocking, John convinced Nurina that Septimus' life will be in danger, so long he pursues this dumb Dwemer lockbox which he thought to have the heart of Lorcan contained within. In the game, this leads to the death of the old man at the hands of, or rather, on the tentacles of Hermias Mora himself. An act which is not strange for the Daedric Prince of secrets and forbidden knowledge. Previously, John encountered a form of Hermias Mora in Septimus' solitary cave, which appeared as a wretched abyss, and it requested John to take Septimus' role in the project of unlocking the Dwemer lockbox. Despite John's insisting that he is no servant of Hermias Mora, the latter didn't really care about it, and tossed the role on John anyway. While many Daedric princes, such as Azura, Namara, and Molag Bal require worship and dedication, Hermias Mora was more of an urge rather than dedication. So long as one is driven to pursue knowledge and uncover secrets, Hermias Mora would always be there leeching on their minds and driving them to the darker sides of knowledge more often than not. It is a fact that can't be denied since every discovered thing so far was always thought to be weaponized or turned against something. Either way, John and Nurina managed to relocate Septimus Cygnus to a different location after a lot of work. The stubborn old fool was so adamant about the Dwemer lockbox that he was almost a skin sack of bones. Still, Nurina put in his mind another idea about the heart of Lorcan and sent him on a false trail in the research of the Eye of Magnus, which occupied his focus even after the incident of the college and the Eye. As for tonight, John has gathered all the elven bloods required to recreate a sample of Dwemer blood and use the Elder Scroll of the Dragon to decipher the lock combination of the Dwemer lockbox. While it wasn't as easy as he thought it would be, and it seemed that Septimus was a vital part of the equation, John used time and subtlety to put the research of Septimus together and unlock the Dwemer lockbox. Per his prior knowledge, there was no heart of Lorcan in the Dwemer lockbox. Instead, it was a book locked inside with a dangerous magical aura surrounding it. That was none other than the Ogma Infinium, also known as the Tome of Power, the Librum of Knowledge, and the Book That Knows. The Ogma Infinium is an ancient tome of knowledge and an artifact of great power. It was written by Xarxes, the scribe of Auriel, who had been granted the knowledge within by Hermias Mora. The name of the tome comes from Ogma, the wife of Xarxes, whom he created from his favorite moments in history. The knowledge within the tome grants the reader access to the artifact's energy, which can be manipulated to achieve near demigod abilities and the paths of steel, shadow, and spirit. Might, shadow, and magic are the three main sections of the tome. When Hermias Mora asked about Septimus, John revealed that he drove the old man far in order to hoard the reward within the Dwemer lockbox for himself. While not completely a lie, the answer seemed to have satisfied the Daedric prince, who had no intentions of letting Septimus gain the Ogma Infinium from the start. With his face flattened with the ground and the bones of his body shattered to 1,000 pieces, the Houndmaster was instantly dragged away from John by a magical force that landed him right next to the night-like vampire. The Bloodscreamer, who just witnessed this whole thing, immediately retreated as far as she thought to be a safe distance from John. "Darling dear, can we just focus on those vampire things and then continue where we left off?" Alina asked John. "No way, honey. You think I can focus on anything with you around?" John laughed off with a playful tone. But this pink atmosphere was not bound to stay, since there were some sour visitors. "Enough with your crap." The night-like vampire shouted at John. "If you are here to fight, I will be your demise, mortal." "Chill, dude." John almost freaked out by the vampire's aggressive attitude. "Calm your tits." "No," the vampire knight replied. "Rile up your bits." Almost everyone furrowed their brows for a second, vampires and mortals alike. John also tried to understand what this vampire was about. It's not every day you meet such an interesting fellow. John laughed lightly. It's not every night you meet such a dull foe. The vampire knight replied. Uh-huh. John was still trying to figure out that vampire in front of him. He has a way of twisting words. Alina commented. You have a way of uttering surds. The vampire replied aggressively. What the? Alina frowned. He means you're speaking incomprehensible nonsense. John said. Alina looked at John with anger. He said it. John pointed at the vampire. I'll slap oblivion out of that bitch. Alina pointed at the vampire. I'll smite Etherius into that witch. The vampire replied. Now, this is getting tiring. John shook his head. No, this is getting firing. The vampire shouted. You know what? I actually like where this is going. John turned to the vampire. I don't know and I despise when that is staying. The vampire opposed every word John said. Huh. John laughed, and I thought I had daddy issues. Issues are for losers. I prey on daddies. The vampire shouted. Oh, John covered his mouth. You fine, man. Fine starts with an F. F stand for fuck. Fuck you. The vampire replied. All right, let's start from the beginning. John said. Never. Let's end it from the finale. The vampire replied. Okay. John shrugged his shoulders. Good evening. Bad morning. The vampire shouted. It seems you won't rest easy. John said while glaring. It appears you will die hard. The vampire shouted. Amazing. John was actually admiring the vampire. Hey, don't feed into his fantasies. Alina poked John. Fantasies are for losers. Food too. I only drink blood and feast on the pain of reality. The vampire said. He's so hardcore, John said before turning to Alina. Honey, can I keep him? Are you for real now? Alina sighed. What? Look at him. He looks harmless. John pointed. Harmless? Alina looked at John with bafflement. Look, I'll go grab him, John said. It seemed that he finally decided to stop fooling around and do some beating, as 3 vampire commanders represented a lot of challenges for the defenders. John was like the final boss of a video game who just decided to hop in front of all the small mobs. He's dangerous. The Bloodscreamer warned the other vampires, especially the knight-like vampire and the Houndmaster who was halfway recovering his wounds. Danger is a waste of time. The knight-like vampire shouted and stepped forward. Wait, he's faster than my natural reactions. He is no easy prey. The Houndmaster said as he was kneeling and fixing back his broken shoulder. I prey on darkness for breakfast, and your natural reactions suck. The knight-like vampire put his hand on his armor's waist belt and suddenly undone it. That belt, which was all made of segmented metals, suddenly turned into a sword with the same segmented pattern and had the face of a gargoyle on its crossguard. Each segment of the blade was pointy from the side and gave the image of a sword-like spine. On top of that, a large dark cloak appeared on the knight's back and enveloped him in a cover of darkness, which seemed like an advanced form of shadow magic. John analyzed the cloak to be a ward-like spell that can negate magic from high levels, even and the sword had anti-magic prosperities. It seemed like the knight vampire was a mage slayer, someone that may have been specifically prepared to deal with him. Nice. You seem like a challenge, John said while cracking his knuckles. Together, but just as the vampire and John were about to clash, the beams of magic struck John where he stood. The Bloodscreamer and the Houndmaster seemed to have decided to start attacking with spells from the backlands. Coward. But just as their powerful magic attacks bypassed the knight-like vampire, he waved his black cloak in rage and dispelled the 2 beams cast by his 2 comrades. No. Why? The Houndmaster asked. It was our chance. The Bloodscreamer cried. Your cowardness reeks to the end of oblivion. Only I shall feast on him with my blade. The vampire replied and looked ahead in John's direction. A cloud of dust may have been caused by the 2 powerful beams of magicka, but as that cloud settled, John appeared standing where he was with his 2 palms ahead of him as he seemed to have tanked the 2 powerful spells barehanded. Now that's dirty, John said, and with a strong repulsive magicka, John returned to 2 attacks with the same power and aggressiveness toward the 2 vampires. He only needed to blast the 2 from where they stood before he suddenly rushed to the knight-like vampire and delivered a punch to his helmet. Thud! A loud collision sound was heard as John's fist met the vampire's helm. Yet despite John's physical power, "Oh!" John exclaimed in surprise. The vampire wasn't even shaken. "Is that all you got?" he asked with his eyes flashing red behind the visor of his helm. "Boy, you're so cool." "My turn!" the vampire shouted and raised his sword to swing it sideways. As his arms swung and crossed his sight, the vampire ended his slash with nothing interrupting him. As soon as he saw what was ahead of him, the vampire retreated his swords and laughed proudly. "Ha ha! Eat that, mortal! You disintegrated from just a single slash," he said. "Yeah, man, that slash was crazy strong." John agreed. "I told you you'll die hard." "Ha ha ha," the vampire replied. Yes, very hard." John leaned on the vampire's shoulder. The 2 turned to each other, and silence predominated. "Something wrong?" John asked. "Your ghost too realistic," the vampire commented. "Really?" John frowned. "Should I pinch your metal cheeks?" "Go ahead," the vampire said. John tried to pinch the helmet, but it was too smooth to pinch. "That won't do. How about a little nudge?" "All right." John raised his hand and smiled just barely. "Incoming." John gave a heads up before letting his punch loose. The vampire thought he could take it this time, but just as he felt the pressure coming from the attack, he instinctively put his sword up to defend himself. The fist almost clashed with the sword, but the fist stopped just 1 inch before it hit. Thunder Cookie. From an inch distance, John launched his Thunder Cookie against the blade of the vampire knight, and it was nothing less than a blast. The vampire couldn't even stand his ground, and with 2 straight lines in the dirt beneath him, the vampire was sent back almost 30 meters. 100 feet in American. The Thunder Cookie was a mighty attack, as always, and John alone dealt all that damage by himself against the 3 vampire commanders. "I still want to keep you, but tell the guy in the back to come ahead for his turn," John said with a serious face. The state of the 3 vampires was, without a doubt, miserable, and if their master didn't show up. "I'll kill them all," John shouted, and with his staff he cast a sun element to the sky. The spell flew upward like a bolt of lightning till it reached beyond the clouds then. Fiat lux, let there be light. The sky started to brighten up, and like fireworks, the rays of the holy element started to shine on the land. The light of Aetherius, a master-level restoration spell that covers the sky with light and draws ultraviolet rays from the upper atmosphere. As dangerous as it can be, John fashioned his spell to cause no harm to the living. As for the vampires, help! Aya! Mommy! It wasn't just burning damage the vampires were subjected to. Seeing how they burnt, it was almost like the flash paper that the magicians use for their tricks. In an instant, 2/3 of the remaining vampire horde was annihilated. And just for action, a reaction was a must. Night Dome! And here he was, the leader of the vampire horde, an elder vampire from ages gone that hasn't even made an appearance in the game. He looked like an elderly human with no hair on his head save for 2 thick and long white eyebrows. His skin was as gray as dark elves, and his stature was close to Breton. Moreover, he didn't move by walking around. He simply floated effortlessly and didn't even show any expression on his face. John looked deeply into his eyes and noticed that they were just empty pupils with no iris within. A strange thing to note, since the commander's eyes were glowing. The Night Dome spell, while unknown to John, seemed to have done the opposite effect of the light of Aetherius, and even helped the remaining injured vampires, especially the 3 vampire commanders, to recover. "So," John asked, for on one this time, "whatever it takes to put you down," the vampire leader replied. "That bastard Harkon Fokihar sent you?" John asked. "That bastard Harkon Fokihar only paid us for this," the vampire leader replied. "A mercenary? Interested in switching sides?" John asked. "You pay us with favor for Lord Molag Bal?" the vampire leader asked. "Nope. Fucking Molag. John spat on the ground. Then 4-on-1 it is. The vampire leader opened his hand, and a black sword manifested in his hand, while the 3 vampire commanders started to spread around John. Hold right there. But just as the 4-on-1 was about to commence, someone spoke up from the city's direction. Wolf. John turned to the owner of the voice as the large-bodied, armored Wolfer joined John's side. John. Wolfer nodded to John. Don't forget, I was here first. Alina walked to the scene and joined John's other side. Nice fight, sister. You held up well. Wolfer spoke. Thanks, brother. She replied. You guys are killing shit without me. TSK, 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 you guys are Suruit. Jelinar joined the other 3 while sliding from an Atronak horse. You're late, psycho, Alina said. It's second wife now, Jelinar replied. Any ideas for a honeymoon, hubby? Vampire Slatterton, John replied. Nice, sounds romantic. She jumped cheerfully. I'm John Dare, Grand Thanes of Skyrim. John spoke to the vampire leader, then pointed to the 3 behind him. This my sworn brother, Wolfer, the Forge Master. This is my warrior wife, Alina the Crimson Moon. And that's my hunter wife, Jelinar the Psycho. Call me the Knight Marshal, Elder of the Night Legion from Cold Harbor. The vampire leader replied. Unlike how John introduced his people, the vampires introduced themselves. The Houndmaster of the Night Legion. The Houndmaster spoke first with the last of his broken bones returning back in place. The Bloodscreamer of the Night Legion. The Bloodscreamer spoke while healing the burns on her armor. As the first 2 finished introducing themselves, it was the Night-like vampire's turn. And you? John asked. The Night Legion's mightiest blade. The vampire spun his sword in a spiral while hiding the damage dealt to his plate by John. I'm the Edgelord. And John fell face to the ground. Kudos to AOK YouTube channel and a shout out to their series Edgelord, which inspired the Edgelord character in this chapter. Chapter 7:12, Bloodskull. Chapter 7:12, Bloodskull the Knight Marshal, the Houndmaster, the Bloodscreamer, and the Edgelord. Vampire mercenaries of the Night Legion, a force from oblivion. Versus the Grand Thane John Dare, the Forge Master Wolfer, the Crimson Moon Alina, and the Psycho Jelinar. Warriors and Wizards of Winterhold. John was the first to fall into this confrontation at the exchange of names. Something about the Edgelord he couldn't endure, and he was already flat on the ground. Enough. Enough. Please spare me. I am the Edgelo. Bwahahaha. The Edge. Oh God. Please. LOL. Pant pant. Edge. Low. RD. Wahaha. Please stop. You win. I won't fight you. No more he could endure. John was the first to wave the white flag amidst the disappointed gazes of his comrades. As he rolled in the snow from the laughter he just had, the first to take action after him was Wolfer. Whoever is up for a fight, follow me this way, Wolfer said and walked to the side, not too far from where the 4 faced each other. Edgelord, the Knight Marshal spoke. I will pay back this humiliation with darkness and terror. The Edgelord moved after Wolfer while glaring at John, menacingly. You and me, noisy skank. Alina pointed her sword toward the Bloodscreamer. I'll rip you to pieces. The Bloodscreamer followed Alina as they went in the opposite direction of Wolfer and the Edgelord. You're called the Hound, right? Jelinar spoke to the remaining vampire commander. The Houndmaster, he replied with an annoyed tone. I was also called a hound once too. John's hunting hound. Now I'm his wife. Way to go, right? She didn't even hear what he said. Whatever. The Houndmaster couldn't muster the energy to be irritated after what happened to him a while ago. I'm sure one day you'll be wed to your master too, Jelinar said to comfort him while speaking silly. Ball curse you. The Houndmaster couldn't endure the humiliation and charged at Jelinar as she dragged him to fight somewhere else. As for John, he remained there sitting on the snow where he was originally lying and kept looking towards the Knight Marshal without even speaking. Just like him, the Knight Marshal remained still where he stood without looking at anything in particular. One had to break the silence, and so John gave up and spoke. It is lovely weather we are having today. I hope the weather continues. Pink Panther Ref. It is called Winterhold, though. It is like winter is something that is stuck with this hold, even in summer, you know? Like I'd call it Neverwinter instead of Winterhold to get rid of the stigma, but that would get us a copyright strike probably. We really pushed it way too much with all the Star Wars references. Yeah, the good old days. I like being all dodgy and shit back then. Having so many names, faces, and stuff. Even old Harkon wouldn't catch me in one place. He wants my Elder Scrolls, you know? Would you like to see? Creepy Wonka meme. You know what? Since you and I are going to get some free time, I've brought this book with me. A good read, to be honest. You'd love it if you're into magic and all that arcane stuff. Man, you're so silent. Hey, tell me about your eyebrows. How'd you get them so long and stiff? Is that an option in the race menu I've missed? Fane, you don't have to tell me anything. All right then, keep your secrets. Lord of the Rings meme. Just to be sure, you're not playing hard to get, are you? And how are you not breathing or blinking or anything? I know vampires develop some mortal folk habits, but you look so strict, man. You're really strict. One does not simply be this strict. Lord of the Rings meme. So, was it Harkon who sent you? It was Harkon, right? Right? Star Wars meme. All right, let's talk magic then. You know, I was always a hardcore fan of magic before I'd even come here. But you know what? Once I saw there are only 5 schools, I was like, but when I found mysticism, I was all in. Drake posting meme. You don't want to talk about magic? Fine. How about talking about attacking Sarthel? Of course you know about those guys who attacked the city 4 years ago, and I fucked them up by using the tower's sonic powers. And now, the vampires are also attacking the city from the same direction with sonic powers. Hold on. Attacking with sonic powers? Grew bored meme. Well, pardon my French, but you guys got hit pretty bad, don't you think? DiCaprio Django meme. I'm just messing with you. I know you're keeping me in check here, but so am I. But make no mistake. Holy shit. Is that edgelord Naruto running at Wolfer? Man, just how many memes can fit in a single encounter? Hello, are you still there? John waved to the Knight Marshal, who hadn't even twitched. You dead, bro? John kept calling. Killed you of boredom, haven't I? And calling. Don't make me come and tickle you. And calling. He's dead, or something? John immediately stood on his feet and approached the Knight Marshal in an instant to check on him, but just as that was about to happen, Bast, John was about to say something before. Boom. With a booming sound, John was nowhere to be seen except for a beeline of a man flying toward the city through the open gate. At the place where this man was launched from stood the Knight Marshal, whose arm was extended and his hand in the shape of a fist. It didn't take 3 seconds after that for the Knight Marshal to subtly transform into the Vampire Lord form without noise or drama. His transformation was nothing like anything in the game. Starting from his head, he had 5 horns forming a crown shape. His face wasn't different from what it was in his usual form. His body transformed, causing his ribcage to be larger, his waist to remain as thin as it could be, and his limbs to extend longer than before. As for the wings coming from his back, they were long and sharp at their ends. Annoying bastard. And the first words the Knight Marshal spoke, not out of necessity, were these words. He retreated his arm, and with a simple step, he traveled all the way to the place where John landed beyond the walls. It was a house not too far from the city gate. The house collapsed as John hit it, but it was already cleared of its residents, so no one was in danger once the Knight Marshal arrived. As for the Knight Marshal, he looked at the rubble of the wooden house and snorted as he extended his left with a vampiric grip spell to remove the rubble and expose the fallen John. Whistle. But just as that was about to happen, a whistle was heard in the air, with an object entering the range of perception approaching at an unbelievable speed. That speed was so fast the Knight Marshal wanted to retract his hand, but it was already too late. The object crossed it and landed not too far from him. Slash thud. After the sword passed, something was slashed before it fell to the ground. That was the arm of the Knight Marshal he just extended to cast a spell. So let me get this straight. John spoke from behind the rubble. You come into my house, you suck my dick, then you call me gay. John didn't seem to appreciate the fact that he was called annoying after being pestered by the likes of those bloodsuckers. The object which landed right now started whistling again as the rubble from the house started to levitate up and John appeared standing behind it. The object then flew and rested in John's hand. "Good seeing you, old friend. It seems you're done resting." John spoke to the red, sword resting in his hand. Bloodskull. While the fight was occurring in the city, the main objective of the vampires was being accomplished in the silence of night. The silence, the fourth lieutenant of the Night Marshal, has successfully slipped into Sarthal without raising so much of a single alarm. He slipped through every defense system unhindered and unbothered by them, no matter how complicated they were. The goal of the vampires' attack on Winterhold wasn't just a simple hunt to cause mayhem or anything of the sort. And why would it be? Winterhold is too strong and it would cause too much damage to their horde. The real reason behind this attack is to help the Silence infiltrate Sarthal and locate the objectives the Night Legion was hired to retrieve. The first objective, and the primary one, was to locate and retrieve the Elder Scrolls hoarded by John Dare. These powerful artifacts of unimaginable power were sought after by none other than Lord Harkon Fokihar, the lieutenant of Molagbal on Nirn, and the one who would achieve the prophecy that will bring about the Night of Glory to the vampires. The second objective was to locate and retrieve the runaway daughter of Lord Harkon Fokihar, Serena Fokihar. She disappeared as soon as the Fokihar clan managed to return to Nirn, and she is thought to have been kidnapped by John Dare. While her life or death is undetermined, she is of vital importance to the plans of Lord Harkon. The price paid by Lord Harkon will allow the Night Legion to get closer to Molagbal, the patron of vampires, and to achieve a higher ranking in his realm of Cold Harbor. The plan was almost flawless, and once John Dare was drawn out, it was time for the Silence to infiltrate. For this infiltration, the Silence was disguised as a common elder who was a resident of the city and was kidnapped outside the walls a couple of days ago. So far, the old man's identity checks in Sarthal as a citizen. Still, the Silence was feeling uneasy as he was facing the least expected problem he could ever think of. In the way he was talking inside the city, two animals crossed his path. One was a bear and the other was a wolf. The two were not particularly big as bears and wolves go, but those kinds of animals shouldn't be in a city. Moreover, they shouldn't be this close to one another. The situation reeks. The Silence tried to step back into the shadows and decided to step away from moonlight into the nearest source of darkness, but that wasn't this easy. As his legs were in shadow, it was as hard as the cobblestone lining the road. One glance at it, and the Silence could see a shadow of a small creature standing on top of a high post. As the Silence turned, he could see a black cat standing on that post and blocking his escape path. Her glare was menacing, and her eyes were freezing cold as she stood on her four limbs with her legs on the post ready to bounce. Another Naruto ref. The three beasts rushed at the vampire together, and before it could even transform into a vampire lord, they ripped two of its limbs before sending it on the run outside the city. Nefertiti faced the other two beasts who assisted her in the fight, and she transformed into her human form. "It is my first time seeing those of my kind," she said, and looked at the pair of wolf and bear. The two looked at each other and transformed into human forms as well. In front of Nefertiti were the two siblings, Alfhild and Foamrim of the Skull. Chapter 713, Going All Out. Chapter 713, Going All Out. I was having some depression lately. Sorry for the bad schedule. It hasn't answered the call of its master since it was laid to rest in John's personal gallery. However, the red ebony sword could bear the weight no longer and took matters to its own. When John left Skyrim to exile, he left Bloodskull hanging above Winterhold with magic and told it to descend and protect his family when they needed to. They rarely needed such help, but from time to time, Bloodskull acted as a reminder of John's presence in the land. After John arrived, Bloodskull didn't see much action until today. "Old friend," John called the sword, and with a whistling sound, It rested in John's hand. Bloodskull, ebon blood longsword. Aura attacks. Sword ego. With such a sword in hand, John felt like missing the old days, and with a smile that couldn't hide his excitement for battle, his red and black aura was slowly rising around him. The tyrant aura, it was kept suppressed for a long time since John was only getting stronger as of late, and if he was honest with himself, he would admit that he is a bit worried about what sort of damage his aura will do when it is in full display. This night, and for some reason, John's worries were thrown out of the window, and he focused on his enemy, the Knight Marshal. "I have one request." John then spoke as he approached his foe, the Knight Marshal in his vampire lord form. As usual, the Knight Marshal wasn't one to use many words. "Don't die too soon." John spoke his piece and aimed his sword at the Knight Marshal. With a vicious sneer, the Knight Marshal raised up the arm that was cut, and, as if ash was starting to form on it, it was being rapidly restored to what it was before it got cut. "Come," and the Knight Marshal spoke. He didn't need to finish his words before he saw something beyond understanding. John was a fair distance away, just now, and as soon as he was told to come, his knee was already meeting with the face of the Knight Marshal. A tit for tat, the Knight Marshal was sent in a beeline through the open gate of Sarthel and crashed outside the city at a burning house in the shantytown. "I was being serious." John's voice didn't come from far away or from outside the crumbled burning house. It was there with him when the Knight Marshal regained his balance. Before he could even react, an uppercut arrived at the chin of the Knight Marshal and the world around him fell down. Or was he the one going up? It was almost difficult to tell with all that concussion he was subjected to. Enough! A blood aura exploded as the Knight Marshal, and he suddenly disappeared from view in a form of mist. On the ground, John walked slowly toward the plaza of the shantytown and stood while watching the sky, waiting for whatever comes next. But in a moment of heightened senses, John immediately waved his sword behind him, and a clank of metal was heard, yet in the same instant, a sword stabbed his left side. Arg! The pain of metal and bone clashing against each other made him almost want to jump away, but he held the blade that stabbed him with his free hand and stopped it. The mist around the Knight Marshal dissipated, and as he appeared in front of John, he was holding two short swords, one pushing against John's bloodskull and the other stabbing him. "I'll feast on your blood." The Knight Marshal finally made a statement full of rage and malice. "So you're the one that edgy boy is taking after." John smiled despite the pain he was experiencing. "Dying." The Knight Marshal wasn't laughing around and pushed against John with his mighty vampiric aura. John's aura didn't waver down one bit, but he still retreated away from the Knight Marshal while healing his wound. The Knight Marshal, however, laughed viciously while seeing John trying to heal himself. The wound wasn't healing, and of course, the bleeding wasn't stopping. John looked at the Knight Marshal's swords and realized that the moment he was stabbed, he was subjected to its bleeding effect. Moreover, the Knight Marshal was absorbing John's vitality with these swords. Vampire weapons, vicious little things. "Fine." John's smile didn't grow any thinner, and he only had to utter a few names. "Shiagarath." "Sure." "Blessing of Shiagarath. Power." "Mad Champion. 2,500% vitality regen for 60 seconds at the expense of sanity." "Blessing of Shore. Power." "Heartbreaker. Against any non-Nord. Gain more power the more prolonged the fight gets. However, you lose all momentum once you're stopped." With the two blessings in his arsenal of abilities, the aura around John gets more violent and tyrannical. His legs darted him ahead like a loose arrow towards the Knight Marshal with nothing in mind but to bring disaster on a vampire. "Take this." With the sword falling at the Knight Marshal, the vampire didn't dare to be lax while confronting this version of John with the suffocating feeling he emitted, and suddenly spun around with his sword to dodge the attack, which split the ground. John's eyes were fixed on the Knight Marshal's movements, and before the Knight Marshal would dodge completely, John extended his free hand to grab the vampire's arm. It was almost impossible for the Knight Marshal to move without John's permission at this point, and with just one swing, John tossed the Knight Marshal a league to the north. Would he stop at this rate? No. John was already chasing after the vampire. He tossed and waved his sword in thin air to produce an aura blade that chased after the Knight Marshal. Against such a dangerous aura strike, and not being able to gain a foothold in his current state, the Knight Marshal spun around himself again, but this time he wasn't dodging anything, and he didn't do just one spin. He spun so rapidly like a spiral and let off many storms of flying blades. The flying blades were spinning as fast as the Knight Marshal and flew in strange patterns and even multiplied like a dread illusion, all while aiming at John's aura attack, and even John himself. It took 7 flying blades to stop John's aura attack, and the rest were already trying to put distance between John and the Knight Marshal. Still, John was waving his sword with all his senses focused and on the brink of letting loose. The Knight Marshal realized the danger of facing John in close-quarter combat at this point in the fight and decided to let the distance between them grow. John was unstoppable, but just like a raging bull, he'd be distracted by whatever was in his vision. That's when the Knight Marshal decided to go with the big spells. He immediately discarded the swords, and on his hands appeared 2 spheres of blood magic that were charged with his vampiric essence. They enlarged into the size of a medium rock, and he cast them at John. John immediately dodged the first by rolling sideways, and with his sword, he cut the second in half, only to find that there was no essence to the power of the spell. While not taking risks, he avoided the byproduct of the spell, which was a storm of bat-like blades that kept whirling around the blood energy spheres and chased after him. Even the one that he dodged before homed back at him and gave him a chase. Cunning. John felt the pressure from the 2 spells and noticed that the Knight Marshal had managed to regain a foothold and started to control the 2 spells to pressure him more. Feeling as if he was about to be pushed back, John pulled out another card. Bothia, Blessing of Bothia, Power. Berserk, take less damage and deal more damage in a feral state of mind. The damage dealt and taken depends on how far you rage. With this wild card, John discarded all forms of protection and let the fight climax get to his head. He swung his blade, and its aura was launched not only in one blade, but multiple. He turned to the blood sphere that was flanking him from the back and punched it beforehand to dispel it, while the Knight Marshal lost his concentration to dodge the aura blades. John didn't give him room to breathe and leaped high with his fist radiating in red and his eyes turning black. The chaos infection ran itself loose in his mystic tattoos, and its patterns come to life as he punched down a chaotic aura punch. The Knight Marshal sensed something horrible approached him and had to dodge it no matter what. He discarded all his pride and pushed himself with both his physical and magical powers to keep away from the coming menace. Boom! Like a meteor, the fist landed off mark and the land shook over Winterhold. As for the intended target, he rolled away a few times after landing near the northern shores. The dust settled, and the vampire looked up to see that John leveled the area with his attack and still stood tall looking for a fight. However, this time he wasn't just a mortal. He was like a mortal threat to the entire vampire kind. The demi-princes of Oblivion wouldn't fight like that. The Knight Marshal spoke his longest sentence for the night. While expecting John to reply, it was clear that this sort of luxury wouldn't be provided this easily. Still, John seemed like he was about to say something. What? The Knight Marshal didn't seem to understand the meaning of that word, but by the next second, he wished he knew what it meant. Not KSD. The Thursday that John shouted launched him in a straight beeline towards the Knight Marshal and caught him in a melee. This was the worst-case scenario for the Knight Marshal, who wanted to avoid John's brute strength at all costs. But still, this was an elder vampire, one that has gone through many wars and fought with creatures from Oblivion and beyond. He wouldn't lose this easily or this soon. John slashed once, twice, and thrice. The Knight Marshal would bury the sword strikes and deflect them using his insanely strong and sharp claws, but at the 4th slash, 2 fingers were cut off. John was aiming to dismember the vampire limb from limb, but the latter seemed wary of that scenario and tried to evade it at all costs. What he couldn't evade, however, was Jon's kick to his guts. Willing to finish his foe, Jon raised his sword with his two hands and attempted to perform a downward slash with an enormous amount of aura. No matter how the Knight Marshal tries to dodge, this one is undodgeable. The only way to survive this, however, is to stop it before it comes. The Knight Marshal jumped ahead and held Jon's forearms before he would perform his finishing move. It was a game of power, and the Knight Marshal couldn't find a leeway from a frontal confrontation. Jon tried to slice the Knight Marshal in half, but the Knight Marshal actually put up a decent amount of power to disable Jon's attack. At this moment, it was the two of them just pushing against each other. This is more like it. Jon discarded his sword too and pushed back against the Knight Marshal with maddened laughter. He pushed, and finally, they were pushing against one another properly hand in hand. Their hands were locked together, and they were even head-butting one another. No matter how thick Jon's skull is, there were 5 horns on the head of the Knight Marshal to headbang at. However, what concerned them more was their foothold, and the two kept digging their feet firmly into the rocky ground as they pushed one against the other. You'll die, and every vampire in your ranks shall be slaughtered by my hands. Jon shouted and laughed. Annoying. The Knight Marshal barely expressed his annoyance. The two of them kept pushing ahead against the other one with more power and vigor. Their physical force was almost equal, but as Jon was using his aura to gain more power, the Knight Marshal was burning the blood inside him as fast as a car on its last gear. Aowa! Jon shouted and pushed with even more power, but this time. Crack, crack, crack. The land beneath them started to crack, and a fissure formed diagonally. Just with all that might, the two managed to split the Nirn while pushing against one another. Jon was in battle ecstasy and started to overwhelm the Knight Marshal at last. He was even squeezing his hands to shatter them to pieces. Just at that moment, 2 figures came out from the mist behind Jon and attacked him. Master, Lord, the Houndmaster and the Bloodscreamer, who seemed to have retreated from their fights, decided to come and give aid to the Knight Marshal. The method they thought they would do it was by digging their fangs into the neck of Jon Dare. Jon wasn't even fazed by them, but his grip around the Knight Marshal loosened, and the latter jumped a fair distance backward in order to stay away from the madman. After the Houndmaster and the Bloodscreamer, Jon spread his arms and held them together in his embrace. While his actions were weird and not sane, the Knight Marshal was 100% sure that common sense can never be applied to that human, if he can be even called that. What followed, there was the sight of the Houndmaster and the Bloodscreamer squirming and trying to get away from Jon. On the other hand, Jon didn't let them loose. He even didn't allow them to take their fangs off his neck. The chaos infection was pumping through and from him to them. They weren't meant for that kind of power. They withered to black ash between his arms and disintegrated. Seeing that, the Knight Marshal pulled out and vanished into the mist form with one word rumbling in his mind. Monster! Chapter 714, The Cainlorn Beasts. Chapter 714, The Cainlorn Beasts Alina and Jellinar, the Warrior Wife and the Hunter Wife. While polygamy may be an unusual practice on Nirn, that never stopped the men of power from taking multiple spouses during their lifetime. As for the Nordic tradition, polygamy wasn't as prevalent as it was in Elsewhere or Hammerfell, but it had its own forms such as a mistress or a formal lover. Rare would be the cases where a man acknowledges 2 women as his wives, since it wasn't usual anyway. Taking it from a Nordic folklore, Alina was to be the warrior wife and Jellinar was to be the hunter wife, much like how Shor had Kyne as his warrior wife and Dibella as his bed wife, a concubine in other words. Still, Alina held a certain honor and seniority as the first wife and a daughter of a prominent clan. Politically, it would give her privilege and peerage, but whether she wanted to practice it or not was her thing in the end. As for Jellinar, marrying her was a decision that required a meeting to be held by House Dare to make the arrangements for upholding the traditions, especially to come up with the term hunter wife. In the end, The two wives were considered a force to be reckoned with, and since the two approve of each other, the strength of House Dare was guaranteed to reach undisputed heights. That was confirmed in the fight against the vampires at the gates of Sarthal this night. Alina and Jelinar fought the Bloodscreamer and the Houndmaster respectively and did a number on them, which forced the vampire lords into a sorry state. On the other hand, Jon's brother and closest aide, Wulfur, was hammering against the edgelord who proved to be a master of the blades despite all his edginess. Wulfur eventually destroyed his opponent, but the edgelord had a lot of endurance, and his armor protected him like a shell against the smites Wulfur delivered. At one point in the fight, a signal was given to the vampires from the farthest direction in the mountains, and they suddenly started to turn into their mist forms. In these forms, their bodies become incorporeal, and no attack, physical or magical, can harm them. Before Alina would come up with any spell that would stop them, though, they were already escaping. That was the case for both the Houndmaster and the Bloodscreamer. As for the edgelord, my flesh is bound to this armor. My soul is bound to my flesh. The steel doesn't merge with my soul. I am trapped. The edgelord spoke. Idiot, we told you not to wear that stupid armor. The Houndmaster cussed at the edgelord. But it called to me, ugh. The edgelord tried to reply, but Wulfur pressured him with his hammer until he finally flung him away with a swing. At this point, the Bloodscreamer and the Houndmaster were about to flee to the mountains without the edgelord, but before they do that, they halted where they were and turned north. Lord, the Houndmaster uttered before charging northward, followed by the Bloodscreamer. Jon, he's that way. Alina said. Shit, they want to gang up on him. Jelinar added. The two wives looked at one another, and with a nod, they chased after the vampires. This left the edgelord to the mercy of Wulfur, a mercy that wasn't one of his traits. So Wulfur spoke. So, the edgelord tried to stand up on his sword, while making sure to spread his cloak symmetrically around himself. I can take us there, Wulfur said. There is nothing to go to since our world is nothing but a cold void. The edgelord shouted. All right, hold on tight. Wulfur then held the warhammer Volendrung and swooshed it at the edgelord, who took a flight northward. As the Houndmaster and the Bloodscreamer attacked Jon and tried to drink from his blood, the Knight Marshal was in a tight position after seeing his subordinates reduced to ash by the effect of the chaos infection. This loss is too much. He may be able to survive against this monster, but no other vampire will. Those two were vampire lords, not some mudblood vampire from some cavern in the middle of buttfuck nowhere. And they were turned to ash. Just like that. Harkon Folkyhar. The Knight Marshal spoke with all hatred and malice. His emotions appeared on his face for the first time, and they were pure anger. The berserking Jon turned to the Knight Marshal with a grin. Who's that? A friend of yours? Jon summoned his gauntlets, the mammoth anchors, on his arms, and launched their chain attachments at the Knight Marshal, who entered his mist form before they reached him and faded away in the sea of ghosts. Jon was left alone with his blood boiling and the blessings of Sheogorath and Bothia eating away at his mind. He still got some control, judging by the fact that he can still joke around, but he wanted to beat someone up as badly as possible. That's when something fell from the sky right beside him. Jon turned towards it immediately, and his eyes were emitting red with skin fissures of the same color growing around them, and he stared at the fallen thing. Strange enough, it was a full suit of armor with a lot of battle marks on it. Edgelord. Jon smiled menacingly and walked to the armor suit, knowing that its owner was still within. Hey, Jon. As for the one arriving after the armor suit, it was Wulfur with a hammer on his shoulder. You barely dented the armor a few times, Jon said. It requires enchanted weapons to destroy. I only used the unenchanted part of Volendrung to not break it. Wulfur replied and joined Jon as the two stood over the armor suit. You want the armor so bad? Jon asked. No, it was just satisfying beating it up. Wulfur replied. Plus, the guy inside is real fun. Jon smirked. It is time to get rid of him, though, he then said. Jon held up the armor suit and raised it to his level. It seemed that the vampire inside was not coming out, and his mist form couldn't fit him to escape from there. Dark silver armor, John said. Almost as rare as mithril, Wolfer added. With his fist closed, John knocked thrice at the armor. You still in there, buddy? John called. There's a sign for presence, and we are all present in a cage of darkness ready for death. The edgelord replied in a low and unusual tone for him. John turned to Wolfer, and Wolfer shrugged. If you're this depressed, let me brighten you up. John sneered and slapped away the helmet visor and looked through it. The edgelord's face didn't appear fully, but he was there, and he was in his mist form trapped in that armor. Sword, John called Bloodskull, who flew to his hand and tossed the edgelord for Wolfer to hold. He then put 2 fingers on his sword's blade and started moving them up its edge as his fingers bled on it. At that time, Alina and Jelena arrived at the scene and saw what John was doing. Oh boy, Alina could almost instantly read what was going to happen. Akatosh, John then called for something incredible. Blessing of Akatosh, power. Dragon's fire. The blood of the dragon lights up the holy eternal flame of the dragon. John's blood ignited on the blade and lit it all into a flaming sword, something of peerless magnificence and holy majesty. With that, John and Wolfer held together the head of the edgelord and put the tip of the flaming sword on its visor. I'll make sure not to kill you, but the flames of agony will leave a mark upon your soul, John said in an edgy way as he slid the sword inside through the helm. It was then when the wails were heard, and the edgelord finally lost his cool. He shouted and screamed in a language that wasn't incomprehensible to any since they don't understand begging. As for the vampire, his mist form protected him from death, but it left his soul to roast on a holy flame that burned his essence till it charred black. With that, John was finally ready to let it go and spare the poor vampire in full armor. Joel, make sure he gets chained well in the black room, John said. It is about time we have some jester in our court. While throwing the burning edgelord down, John took a deep breath and sighed. You all right, love? Alina walked to John and touched him with her hand to invoke her healing powers. So long you're next to me, I am, he replied with his mind somewhere far away. She was about to say something to him to drive him away from his worries, but his shadow suddenly started acting up, and Nefertiti walked out on his own, with 2 figures being dragged by her. With almost zero effort, she threw them at John's feet. Kitty, John questioned her about the nature of those 2. Human, gifts. She replied with no interest in being praised. Alina just needed to take one look at those 2 and suddenly gasped. Nefertiti, what have you done? She immediately turned to the cat. Bad girl. John looked down at the 2 figures who seemed like Nord teenage children. Who are they? Intruders? He asked. Guests, Alina replied. John looked at the children who were still dazed by Nefertiti's teleportation and then at Nefertiti herself, who seemed indifferent about those guests. What happened? He asked. They're visitors from the Skull village here to ask for aid. Alina nodded. They are Fae. Nefertiti disagreed. What? No. Alina denied it almost immediately, but then hesitated and looked at thin air before asking, Are they? It took her another second for a shocked expression to appear on her face. They are. She asked the thin air again. Your imaginary friend again, Alina? Jelena asked. What? No. It's Gleam. Elder Gleam. Alina replied. Yes. Someone only you can see and speak with. Jelena nodded. I have a lot of them. It is fun. God. Alina rolled her eyes. John crouched down in front of the teenagers who started to come to their senses and met them eye to eye. His appearance may have calmed down, but he still looked like he walked from a battle. Blood was covering his body, and the blessings of Shiagarath and Bothia hadn't completely worn off. Add that to the burning sword he's still carrying. Sister, watch out. Foamrim the brother saw John, and his survival instincts went wild. He dragged his sister, Alfhild, as far as he could from that demon-like man, but she wasn't budging no matter how he pulled her. Looking at what got her stuck, they spotted that John was stepping on the sister's dress as he stood tall and looked down at them. "You two are my guests, I assume." John spoke. "John, don't scare them." From his side, Alina spoke to him while punching his arm. "Sorry." John put his foot away and extinguished the flame from his sword. "We just had a big fight." While the two siblings were still on the ground, the image of John and Wolfer beside him was still nightmare-inducing for normal folk like them, except for the fact that they weren't actually normal. John could spot signs of transformations over the limbs of the two limbs, such as residual fur and animal scent. The brother had signs of a bear transformation, and the sister had signs of a wolf transformation. "A werewolf and a were-bear?" John asked. "No." Nefertiti shook her head. "They're like me. Truly." John was surprised. "That's why you call them fae." "They are indeed fae." Alina spoke in a shaken tone while recalling the meeting she had with those siblings. "So, fae children who claim to be Skull." John said, "That's a new one. What are you? And what do you want from me?" John got close to the siblings while not trying to be any friendlier than the first impression he gave them just now. "You are Thane John Dare?" Alfhild asked. "In the flesh." John nodded. "You are more intense than we thought," Fulgrim said. "Brother." Alfhild shouted at her brother. "Well, you caught me in a bad moment," John said before turning to Nefertiti. "Or should I say my kitty cat caught you and brought you to me in a bad moment. Not sure whose fault is that. We just felt something bad and we tried to defend ourselves," Alfhild said. "Something bad?" John asked. "A vampire," Nefertiti explained. "Where?" John asked. "In the city, Shadow Walker." He was heading towards the tower. She said. "Uh-huh." John nodded and held his chin. So the damn vampires were actually trying to buy time for one of theirs to infiltrate the city and sabotage us. "What can their aim be?" Wolfer asked. "Depends. Harkon Fokihar seemed to have hired these ones rather than using his own force. It was either to check how powerful we are, steal the Elder Scrolls I possess, or something else entirely. It could be all of that at once, too. That's what I would do." John turned to Wolfer and Jelinar while saying something to them while pointing at the edgelord. He then turned to the siblings. "You still haven't told me why you sought me out." John spoke. "You're a Bloodskull, right?" Fulgrim asked. "I am." John nodded. "In that case, the Skull asked for your aid. We lost a lot of our people and lost contact with many villages on the island. Even the Dare Company's people in the outpost have gone missing." Fulgrim said. John frowned. "This is alarming. When did this happen?" John asked. "It all started a fortnight ago," Alfhild said. "And the Allmaker's stones?" John asked. The siblings looked at each other in wonder. They had been blocked. Those who have gone missing would appear and disappear over the Allmaker stones, and no one ever managed to even speak to them. Alfhild said. John shut his eyes and let out a long and tired sigh. "Mirek," he mumbled and looked at the sea. After a minute of confirming the signs of the return of Mirek, John asked the two siblings to return to the city and prepare for departure back to Solstheim. Wolfer escorted them back to Winterhold, while Jelinar dragged the edgelord away to the dungeon. John and Alina remained back in the city. "It seems that time is of the essence again," she said. "Yes, we got the companions, the college, the Thieves' Guild, and the Dark Brotherhood at our beck and call. We can do much now, but this is still way too much," John said and then smiled. "It is like everything, everywhere, all at once. The Dragon Crisis, the Vampire Crisis, and Solstheim's Crisis. The three main quests are finally running all at once." "Hey, wife," John called Alina. "Yes, a bear and a wolf, fae, from Solstheim. No idea what that is," he asked while watching the siblings taken away with Wolfer. Alina started thinking before coming to something. "I've read once that there are sacred beasts to the Skull known as Cainlorn wolves. Another thing is that the Skull are sometimes thought to worship wolves and bears." "Not the Allmaker?" John asked. "The Allmaker is the central figure, of course. The wolves and bears are his messengers, and from those messengers are the Cainlorn wolves. No mention of Cainlorn bears, though," Alina said. "Curious." John said and looked intensely at the siblings, curious indeed. Chapter 7:15 The World Knows. Chapter 7:15 The World Knows. Guess who just turned 28? Should I be worried? A new sun rose upon Skyrim. Warmth spread through the lands, and the citizens of the holds were running towards the city plazas and the town squares across all the Nordic settlements of Skyrim. In this blessed Frida's Friday, a rumor started to spread all across the land. More than a rumor, it was a piece of news that was spread from every major court in Skyrim. It started like this. The Empire and the Stormcloaks decided to switch holds as a gesture of peace. The Empire gave Falkreath to the Stormcloaks, and the Stormcloaks gave the Pale to the Empire. This meant that the two sides were preparing for peace and establishing a truce or a ceasefire at the very least. Who was in the middle of all that? Well, of course, it was none other than Jon Dare, the Thane of, well, everywhere. It was more confusing than ever. No rumor spread without Jon's name stuck to it, for some reason. The nature of the rumors itself was even stranger for those who work in the palaces, and the castles of the main holds were the ones spreading it without any restraint from their lords. First, Jon Dare was the one who convinced the Empire and the Stormcloak to choose peace, since he is the one who holds an ancient artifact from the time of Isgrimmor's dynasty that chooses Skyrim's kings, the jagged crown from the stories and legends. Second, Jon Dare was appointed by all the Jarls of Skyrim as a Thane in every hold, including Eastmarch. This meant that not only was he given complete free rein to establish his business wherever he wanted, it was also a precedent that had never happened before in history. This kind of honor granted him not only the normal honor of a Thane, but also the new title of Grand Thane. The Thane of Winterhold has evolved into the Grand Thane of Skyrim. But why is that? Why would all the Jarls suddenly flock around Jon Dare this badly? The answer was in the third and most important piece of news. Jon Dare is the Dragonborn. Each hold had its own reaction to this piece of news. They all had their relationships with Jon Dare, whether for the good or the bad, and some even held some feelings of rivalry with him, but it was soon to be changed overnight. In Winterhold, home of Jon Dare, the atmosphere was calmer than ever save for a few people who went to celebrate in the morning for such a piece of news. On the earlier night, House Dare repelled an attack by some strong vampires that threatened the land and burned the entire shantytown outside the city of Sarthel. Still, the restoration process was already starting, and the company has paid compensation and insurance money to the owner of the damaged properties. The fact that Jon Dare is the Dragonborn was already a public secret, since Jon Dare was more popular than the Dragonborn anyway in that part of Skyrim. Jon being the Dragonborn is just another plus to the saga of Jon Dare. In Rift Inn, the place that claims to be Jon's origin, the city was already in a bit of turmoil, with the Thieves' Guild coming back to power and regaining a quick foothold in the city. Jarl Lella, lawgiver, returned from the summit just this morning and decided to be swift and prosecute the criminals of the guild. Before she could do that, however, she was met with a businessman who claimed to be an associate with the Dare Company and promised her to cooperate with cleaning Riffin's streets from the low-life criminals and the thugs of the alleys. This so-called associate was none other than Brynjolf in disguise, and his aim was to transform the Thieves' Guild per Jon's instructions to its new form of organized crime establishment that operates above ground rather than through the nasty holes of the Ratway. In Dawnstar, the transition from the Stormcloak to the Empire's side was met with rough resistance as some Stormcloak soldiers refused to leave their posts. Jarl Brina Marilis ordered the rebels to be taken down with the least possible lethal force and were offered either exile or imprisonment. If they were to choose exile, they would be forbidden to ever step into the Pale for the rest of their lives, while the imprisonment option included serving in the mines until they get pardoned. In Falkreath, it wasn't much different from the Dawnstar, but the resistance moved outside to the woods and hid from the Stormcloak prosecution. There was not much resistance after that, and Jarl Dingir assumed his position with the blessing of most of the locals due to his popularity. In Whiterun, the fact that Jon Dare is the Dragonborn was announced from Jorrvaskr rather than the court of Dragon's Reach. The companions seemed to have received news earlier than the rest of the city and spread with the beats of drums and the shouts of warriors. It wasn't until the afternoon that the Jarl of Dragon's Reach confirmed the rumors to some of the key figures in the city. John Battleborn and Alfina Greymane, the associate of the Dare Company in the city of Whiterun, also confirmed this news to those who came knocking at their door. In Windhelm, the city was in greater turmoil than ever since it is the main camp of the Stormcloaks. Signing a truce for the Dragonborn to deal with the Dragon Crisis was thought to be a temporary solution, but knowing that the Dragonborn is John Dare meant that this situation will be extremely volatile. Still, Jarl Ulfric made the claim that the safety of the armies from the dragon attacks is the utmost priority since there was not a sure kill method against the dragons other than the Dragonborn. This quelled the troubles of the public momentarily and bought him enough time to prepare for the next stage of the war. In Solitude, Jarl Bryling was praised for establishing the truce. However, when the Jagged Crown came to the discussion, the proud citizens of Solitude were in complete uproar that it wasn't seized by the Empire or Jarl Bryling. Solitude has enjoyed the strong position of being the capital of Skyrim, with past known rivalries with both Windhelm and Winterhold. After the destruction of Winterhold, one of Skyrim's old capitals, in the Great Collapse, the rivals were reduced by one, but Windhelm remained a commercial and a political rival nonetheless. With both the war against the Jarl of Windhelm, who wants to make himself High King, and the debt from the holder of the Jagged Crown, John Dare, the position Solitude enjoyed was endangered immensely. Still, these worries were pushed by the Empire's side, and John was considered a hero of Solitude with the siege of Solitude fresh in memory. In Mordhau, Jarl Igrod Ravencrone stood in front of her longhouse and announced the news herself. Little did the people of Mordhau care about the outside world, but this was a fair point since they have suffered many dragon attacks, and it was nice to know that the Dragonborn who saved them was actually John Dare. In Markarth, John Dare was famously known for the largest incident in the Reach after the Markarth incident with Ulfric Stormcloak and the Reachmen. The War of Forsworn John Dare was a recorded war between one man and a force of natives where Oblivion was let loose by the vengeful John Dare, and the Forsworn were wiped out from the Reach for the time being. With a few sites of them returning to the edge of civilization, the Forsworn were still nailless, toothless, and broken. They don't even seem as much of a threat as before, and that was thanks to John Dare, the Dragonborn who fights for Skyrim and her people. As for the reaction of the forces outside Skyrim, there were two forces to consider, the Empire of Cyrodiil and the Aldmeri Dominion. While the real governing bodies of these forces haven't been notified of the update yet, the representatives of these forces were major parts of the peace talks this time, and it was said that John has even let his enemies, the Thalmor, stay in the talk, just to make them the insult target whenever the Nordic lords get agitated with each other. The Empire had its own trouble as of late, with the passing of Emperor Titus Mede II in Skyrim at the hand of a Dark Brotherhood assassin. It was a wonder how the Stormcloaks weren't accused of this, but associating someone with the Dark Brotherhood without no basis or evidence is a taboo. Moreover, Jarl Ulfric Stormcloak sent an envoy with words of respect at the funeral of the Emperor and said that despite the hard feelings he possesses against the late Emperor, the departed shouldn't be insulted and for him to rest in peace. This was a smooth move from Ulfric's side that held his slate clean against the Elder Council. The Thalmor embassy of the Aldmeri Dominion hasn't made any comments regarding the news of John Dare being the Dragonborn. With their known animosity with John Dare and the fact that they are still at odds and would aim their weapons at each other whenever the chance rises, the Thalmor kept a low profile for the time being and didn't participate in any political actions. It seemed that they were waiting for advice from the main Thalmor government from Somerset Isles on how to deal with this rather than doing anything rash at the moment. Now, as the world knows who the Dragonborn is, the Dragonborn himself was sleeping peacefully with his women all in a single large bed after he seemed to have consumed them all in a night of raving and drinking. As irresponsible as it may seem, John was mentally preparing for the coming shitstorm he was about to step into, and despite his hedonistic night, he woke up early in the morning and sat on the balcony of his tower while meditating and contemplating his last fight against the Knight Marshal. Status: Name: John Dare, John Hild Firemane. Title: The Dragonborn, Grand Thane of Skyrim, the Boss. A race: Human Nord. Age: 21. Level: 97, Peak Thunderheart Formation. Class: Archwizard Master Warrior. Craft: Grandmaster Binary Enchanter. Bloodline: Firemane, Fireborn/Titanborn. Birth sign: the Serpent, eating the Shadow. Warrior skills: Blade, 98, Master. Blunt, 74, Expert. Polearm, 89, Master. Shield, 50, Adept. Heavy armor, 91, Master. Martial arts, 98, Master. Smithing, 56, Adept. Thief skills: Marksman, 80, Expert. Unarmed, 79, Expert. Acrobatics, 78, Expert. Stealth, 78, Expert. Light armor, 59, Adept. Speechcraft, 91, Master. Alchemy, 42, Expert. Mage skills: Mysticism, plus 99, Legendary. Destruction, plus 99, Legendary. Conjuration, plus 99, Legendary. Restoration, plus 99, Legendary. Alteration, plus 99, Legendary. Illusion, plus 99, Legendary. Enchanting, plus 99, Legendary. It seems that I have hit a wall, huh? John wondered. A mortal wall. Is this what it's like to be at the top? John saw that his magic skills have capped according to the game's logic, but he himself knew very damn well that there's a realm beyond where he is, and the potential for knowledge and skill is basically endless. If this is the last of what his system can fathom, then he will walk past it at some point soon. There's always heaven beyond heaven and skies above the sky. So, what to do from this point onward? The only room for improvement he can have is to garner knowledge and experience, since skill is no longer a viable option. For experience, he has a lot of foes to fight, and for knowledge, he has the Ogma Infinium to read. But there is still something important he had in his pocket during the summit at High Hrothgar, and he thought too much about it all the way here. The Amulet of the Elder Council. He acquired it as a down payment for assassinating the Emperor, but the power this thing can give him is immense. Cyrodiil is currently walking on eggshells, and no heir apparent in House Mead was announced yet. The Elder Council may announce a period of an interregnum, or a regent would take over the power in the White Gold Tower, but John had a plan in mind for that. Last year, he was purchasing a lot of land between Bruma and Cheydinhal through many proxies and shell companies, to the point where he can move a large part of his investments into Cyrodiil. Being a landlord of this scale, what can it possibly gain him with the help of the Elder Council amulet? Chapter 716, Ogma. Chapter 716, Ogma. John wasn't sure what to expect from the Ogma Infinium. Some called this the Librum of Knowledge for the immense amount of information it possesses. Others called it the Tome of Power for the diverse powers that it grants its reader. And others called it the Book That Knows, from how terrifyingly accurate that book can be at offering the information that the reader wants to know. Still, with all its might and glory, it is a book of single use. Once read and its secrets are unraveled to a certain extent, it goes away to find another reader. One can say that this book is the only gateway available to the secret knowledge from the trove of the all-knowing hoarder, Hermias Mora. Still, there is too much about this book to take one's mind away apart from the content within itself. This, of course, speaks of the book's grand history as an artifact that is associated with not just one Ada, but two of them. The first is obviously Hermias Mora, but the other one, and the recognized creator of the book, is the one and only Xarxes, the elven deity and the scribe of Auriel. This goes back to a time when the original spirits and the wandering ones were incoherently intermingled, and time wasn't yet fathomed, as this story happened in no particular era, while in fact some of the conceited elves claim that it was merethic. They said that Xarxes was a mortal of their kind, and he achieved apotheosis by the blessings of Auriel, as their kind was always meant to have. Still, as with all things merethic, it is hard to tell the truth from the fabrications. the story of which two characters are focused on. One is Xerxes the scribe, and the other is Agma, his journal, and later his wife. It starts as all things beautiful, in an age of beauty, magic, and purity. Xerxes was in love with knowledge, especially the records of history and tales of old. Deciding to account his favorite moments in a single tome, the scribe scribed to his heart's content. There was, however, the interference of the impure in this story. The third character that wasn't meant to appear in the Elven records is Hermias Mora, the Daedra of Secrets. In some accounts, Hermias Mora claimed that Xerxes lacked certain pieces of knowledge about his most dear history, and his search led him to the doorstep of Hermias Mora, the one who knows. He, who was very pleased to fill the gaps Xerxes had in his tome, in his Agma. The Agma Infinium was the product of Xerxes' love for history, where he added his favorite moments as said. It was a detailed account that contained a lot of stories about the heroes of old, the kingdoms that rose and fell, the secret eras within the Merethic era, and much more. As a matter of fact, the Agma Infinium's content has much more than just secrets about the techniques of fighting, stealth, and magic. By his nature, Hermias Mora wouldn't let any mortal into the deep secrets of his knowledge, for unlike the noble Xerxes, he is one who hoards knowledge and keeps it a secret, not the one to spread it. It is said that Hermias Mora was left with free rein over a mortal society. He would strip it from all its memories and knowledge, leaving behind nothing but an uneducated gathering of helpless mortals. As for Xerxes and his Agma, the myth doesn't explain much more than the fact that love is divine, and love made the Agma of Xerxes something much more profound. Profound is per se that the Agma had become something Xerxes would call his wife. At least he didn't clone himself into female versions and bone them. With that out of the way, the story goes on and on about Agma and how she questions whether she was created with the will to be Xerxes' wife or with the choice. While there appears to be no definitive conclusion to the tale of Xerxes and Agma, she was still called his wife in the unreliable records of the Altmare. But the Agma Infinium is now in the hand of Hermias Mora, who uses the book as a reward of sorts to bestow the knowledge within on mortals whom he deems fit. Regardless of the criteria, the book was said to give people power almost in the realm of a demi-prince. But there was one thing that John found almost fascinating about Agma, particularly about the Agma practice. In the lore of Xerxes, the elven deity commands his followers in the Almeriad, the famous saga of elves, to keep the Agma practice in these lines. As ye are true children of Aetida, thou shalt honor us by honoring thy own lives. For in each of ye is housed the divine spark, and thus the record of thy actions is a sacred duty. Keep, therefore, each and every one of you, an Agma, an ever-scriven scroll which shall memorialize thy brief lives. Thus and at least this way shalt thy spark be immortal. An interesting concept, and at the very least an act of passing knowledge and experience. One must not forget that Isgrimor's Songs of the Return were some sort of an Agma, which he wrote to be the first human historian after he developed a runic alphabet for the old Atmaran speech. Augur, you have been recording all my actions, right? Yes. Memories, actions, and fights. Much like the memory stars of Sotha Sil, you can have something like that outputted from my memories if you provide the materials. Guess I have had an Agma all along. Glad to be a help. John smiled and started to spread his legs by walking around in the chamber of the augur down at the midden. He had a ton of books with him that he had to go through before thinking about using the Agma Infinium. He used the black books before, but aside from being gateways to Apocrypha, the Agma Infinium is something that is bound to be a lot more dangerous on the psychological front. Aside from the books, he had magical artifacts that can cast protection, the augur who can predict the magical nature of things, and a containing chest that can keep the Agma Infinium sealed while all the preparations are done. And they were. John was simply excited and only wanted to make sure that nothing would go wrong. He cracked his fingers, his neck, and his back before taking out the Agma Infinium and placing it on a pedestal. All right, here we go. John and the augur seemed to be equally interested in the knowledge they were about to get their hands on. As students of the arcane arts, they'd focus on the tome's path of magic chapter and try to traverse its secrets. John opened the cover, and the first page in front of him was a diagram of many interlocked shapes, all written in magical script. By following the triangle shape, one would discover the 3 chapters of the book. By following the circles, one would read the overall content of each chapter. A clever way to make an index. John said, "Mysterious. Sounds exactly like the work of Xerxes." John touched the first page, and a few drops of green, acidic ink gathered around his finger. He moved his finger up to the right tip of the triangle to where the path of magic was, then moved his fingers to the first page of the chapter on the circle diagram. Just like that, the book came to life, and the pages started to turn on their own until they reached the first part of the chapter. "Now would you look at that?" John laughed in glee and waited until the pages got to where the chapter begins. The text was magnificent, the words were elaborate, and the details were astonishingly on point. The root of Magica begins in Aetherius and grows through the veil till its branches bear their fruits all around Mundus. The children of Magnus are spirits of pure energy and shine. The stars and the sun and the celestial bodies. The Magica is bound to assimilate into the world, and the magic is bound to grow weaker until our magic is not the same as the ages beyond us. Oriel in his great wisdom understood these concepts and knew that a predecessor is of vital significance in understanding the nature of one's self. The past, the present, and the future intermingle in the ways of the Sijic, and the wording of PSJJ underlines all the mystic ways of royalty. John read the first page and kept skimming and skimming before moving to the next one and the next one. He then rolled the pages as fast as he could to the last page in the chapter and, "Augur, what the hell?" John asked. It appears the quality of the content on these pages is quite unbefitting. That's just some regular stuff. To John and the augur, the content of the Agma Infinium was a tad underwhelming and didn't present anything new. Still, when John reached a certain point, he discovered that the pages wouldn't turn anymore despite the existence of a lot of pages still remaining till the end of the book. That doesn't make sense. John frowned. If this is all the knowledge we can get from the infamous Agma Infinium, then why bother? John tried to brute force his way into the remaining pages, but they were tightly sealed, and even his fingernails couldn't dig through them. The book was infuriatingly durable. Fuck. John stepped away from the book after having the worst case of blue balls since his reincarnation. He was angry and upset to a degree that irritated him. "Leave this one to me." Such tomes usually contain clues on how they were made across their content. Once analyzed, we may figure out a way to access the restricted sections. John turned the Agma Infinium on the pedestal towards the augur and walked away to think as he skipped back and forth in the chamber. He kept thinking and thinking before deciding to turn back and take one more look. It appears that there is some mysterious thing happening with this tome. The augur said so, but John couldn't really understand what the augur meant until he looked closely at the text. What the? As if the ink on the pages was being dried out, the text and the magical diagrams were disappearing from the pages of the Agma Infinium at a fast pace, as if something was taking it all away. "Hermias Mora!" John exclaimed. "He's trying to keep us from knowing the tome's secrets." If it was like that, then John was absolutely right. Hermias Mora was interfering as fast as he could to keep John and the augur from learning what he doesn't want to be learned. John was desperately turning the pages of the book to spot something that he can hold in memory before it all disappears, but he wasn't even given enough chances to do so. Fuck, can't he just take the book away instead of doing this? John shouted in anger. The contract between the Agma and its reader is for the latter to learn one chapter from the book before it can never be held by that reader ever again. It was the method that Hermias Mora used to keep people like you from learning too much. Bastard. The problem with you is that you are already aware of all the knowledge he affords to spare in the chapter of the Path of Magica. He can't let you know more secrets. That's who he is, the Prince of Secrets. Really? John angrily replied. Then how about this? John immediately cast various runes around the chamber, runes that can generate many dimensional spells. Nefertiti, I want you to catch that book from the shadows and isolate it from the influences of oblivion. Nefertiti didn't reply, but she seemed as angry as John was, and immediately sent her shadow magic from the runes John had cast to hold the Agma Infinium from various angles. Once she got a real grip on it, she started to do as John said, and completely isolated the book from outside interference. Is that enough to keep the influence of Hermes Mora off the book? John asked. Maybe, but you won't still be able to pull back the knowledge you need in a place Hermes Mora knows. You need to hide the book in a place he can never look into. Shit, John cursed. Hide in a secret place from the Prince of Secrets? That's basically feeding him information when it is kept a secret. As a force of nature, Hermes Mora is the knower of all secrets. He can't be kept away from a secret unless it involves another original spirit. And even those kinds of secrets he is actively hunting. Just how to hide this tome away then. I've got an idea, but at this moment, Nefertiti spoke to John. Rub it in cat fur, John asked. Is Hermes Mora allergic to cats? That may actually work. Yes, evil beings can't withstand the might of cats. John made a quick deduction. That won't work, human. Still, Nefertiti denied John's last hope. No, kitty cat, how can you say that? John desperately spoke. What is your method, old neighbor? The augur then asked. Don't we have that? Nefertiti materialized in the chamber, and around her tail was the key that Nocturnal bestowed upon John. The shadow key. Now is clear. A place even a Daedric prince wouldn't find is beyond a shadow gate. Now that they have the key, they only need the gate. If you find any errors, ads pop up, ads redirect, broken links, non-standard content, etc., you're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.